The land was wild, and so were the men who lived by the edge of the sword. Among them was a fierce warrior, hardened by years of battle and raids, a man feared by settlers and respected among his people. He lived by the creed of strength, honor, and survival. Yet on one fateful night, his path crossed with something that neither blade nor fire could erase. It was during a raid on a small settlement that he encountered her. Fires licked the wooden fences, smoke filled the air, and screams of frightened villagers rose into the night sky. While others fought, he wandered deeper into the chaos and found a young woman cowering inside a barn. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn from the scramble, and her eyes wide with fear. But even in terror, there was something steady in her gaze, something that unsettled him. He cornered her, and in desperation she whispered words that would echo through his soul forever. "Don't raise my skirt, please." Her plea was soft, fragile, yet heavy with dignity and desperation. For a moment, he hesitated. He was a warrior who had slain men without pause, who had taken spoils without guilt. But this whisper pierced through his armor more sharply than any weapon ever had. Yet pride, lust, and the cruelty of conquest overcame him. He ignored the whisper, ignored the trembling of her body, and committed the act that would become the chain around his spirit. He raised her skirt, not realizing that in doing so, he was not just violating her body but binding his own soul in eternal torment. The raid ended. His people celebrated victory, carrying away food, weapons, and trophies. To them, it was another night of survival, another strike against encroaching settlers. But for the warrior, something had changed. He rode back with the others, yet the echo of her voice traveled with him. In the silence of night, when the drums quieted and the fires died, he heard it again. "Don't raise my skirt, please." Her whisper was not just a plea, it became a haunting. He began to see her eyes wherever he went. In the moons, reflection on water and the smoke rising from the fire, even in the faces of other women in his village. He could not escape her. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that barn, with her trembling before him, whispering for mercy. For the first time in his life, victory tasted like ash. His people admired his strength, but he felt hollow. They spoke of his bravery, but he felt only weakness. The warrior who had once been unshakable was now trapped by an invisible chain, a whisper, a plea, a moment of dishonor that stripped him of his freedom. He tried to drown the memory in battle, throwing himself into fights with reckless abandon, as though seeking death would free him. But death never came. Instead, he lived, and with every passing day the whisper grew louder inside his chest. He realized then that some wounds are not carved into flesh but into the spirit, and they never heal. The woman he had wronged did not know it, but she held his soul prisoner. Her whispered plea was like a spell, binding him tighter than shackles. Though she may have moved on with her life, perhaps rebuilding her home, perhaps finding strength in survival, he remained her, captive in silence. The forbidden encounter was not simply an act of conquest, but the birth of his torment. What he thought would be a fleeting moment of dominance became an eternal reminder of weakness. For in ignoring her whisper, he had lost his freedom forever. The warrior, once feared by men, became enslaved by a whisper. The warrior returned to his people after the raid, but victory did not rest easy on his shoulders. While others celebrated, sang around the fire, and boasted of their triumphs, he felt a gnawing emptiness. The woman's whisper echoed in his mind like a drumbeat that would not fade. "Don't raise my skirt, please." Though the night had ended, its shadow stretched endlessly before him. At first he thought it was simple guilt, something that would pass as time distanced him from the act. Warriors did many things in war, things men did not speak about but accepted as part of conquest. Yet this was different. He began to feel eyes upon him even when he was alone. Unseen watchers, spirits hovering at the edge of his vision. The people of his tribe spoke often of the ancestors, of spirits who guided and judged. Now, for the first time, he wondered if they had turned against him. As days passed, his unease grew. In his dreams, he saw the woman's face, pale and trembling, yet powerful in its silence. She did not curse him with words nor scream for vengeance. Instead, she whispered. That whisper, soft as falling snow, cut deeper than any war cry. Each night the same vision returned, until sleep itself became his enemy. He sought the wisdom of an elder, a medicine man known for his knowledge of spirits and omens. The elder studied him long and hard, then said, You have awakened a curse, warrior. When you dishonor one who pleads for mercy, the Great Spirit marks your soul. You can win battles, you can ride across the plains, but your spirit will never be free. You are bound, not by her body, but by her whisper. It will follow you beyond death if you do not seek balance. The words sank into the warrior like a spear. He wanted to reject them, to claim that he was above such things, that he was too strong to be undone by a single moment. Yet deep inside, he knew the elder spoke the truth. His strength had not shielded him from the haunting. His courage in battle had not silenced the whisper. He was cursed. The curse did not strike him with thunder or fire. Instead, it spread like shadows creeping at dusk, subtle but inescapable. His hand trembled when he held his spear. His horse grew restless beneath him, as if sensing the unease in his soul. He no longer laughed at the fire with his brothers, for their joy sounded hollow to his ears. Women of the tribe no longer stirred his desire, for in every glance he saw her, the one who whispered. Even in the midst of triumph, the curse followed. In one great battle, his people overcame a rival tribe. Yet when the last enemy fell, he did not feel pride. He heard her voice in the wind whispering soft and accusing. His people cheered his name, but to him, their cries were drowned out by that single plea. Please. The warrior began to fear solitude, for in silence, the curse grew stronger. He kept himself surrounded by noise, by horses, by fire, by the clash of steel, anything to drown the whisper. Yet the more he fought it, the louder it grew. Like a river cutting stone, it carved its mark into him. He wondered if the woman herself had cursed him. Perhaps she had the hidden power of the settler's god, or perhaps her soul was guarded by a spirit stronger than his own. Or perhaps, worst of all, she had done nothing, and the curse was born from within him, from the dishonor he could never erase. His people began to notice the change. He looked weary though young, his eyes clouded though uninjured. Some whispered that he had angered the spirits. Children avoided his shadow as though sensing the heaviness in it. His fame as a warrior did not protect him from the shame that grew like a sickness, and so he lived, trapped in a prison of his own making. A curse that was not cast by a shaman, nor carved in stone, but one that came from a whisper, the simplest, softest sound, yet the strongest chain. For the warrior learned too late. A man may conquer villages, win wars, and ride as a legend across the plains, but if he dishonors a plea for mercy, his soul will never be free again. The curse was not upon his body but upon his spirit, and there was no medicine strong enough to break it. The warrior believed that strength was measured by the weight of a blade, the speed of a horse, and the number of enemies a man could cut down. For years he lived by this code, unchallenged and unbroken. But when the woman whispered, "Don't raise my skirt, please," she showed him a kind of strength he could not fight. It was not the strength of battle, but of dignity, of the human spirit refusing to be broken, even when the body trembled. He thought his act had ended in that, barn just another conquest in a life of many raids. Yet what lingered was not her weakness but her power. Though she never fought him physically, her whisper became stronger than his war cries. In silence, she defeated him. Her voice lived inside him, echoing with every sunrise. At first, he tried to dismiss it as weakness and an old wound in his mind that would heal with time. But he noticed that every time he saw another woman, his people's wives, maidens, even strangers in passing, the whisper returned. He would see their faces, yet hear her voice. It was as if she had left a part of herself inside him, not by choice but by the strength of her plea. Her silent power began to reshape him. He started to hesitate before battles, distracted by the memory. The warrior who once charged fearlessly now faltered, his thoughts drifting back to the barn. His brothers mocked him, asking if he had grown soft. But he could not explain to them. How could he tell warriors who measured glory by blood that he was haunted not by a blade but by a whisper? Even nature seemed to conspire to remind him of her. In the rivers he saw the reflection of her eyes. In the wind, he heard her breath. In the crackling of fire, he heard the fragile strength of her voice. He realized then that her power was not in the words themselves, but in what they carried, the eternal truth that some acts stain the soul forever. She had no army, no weapons, no tribe to defend her, yet she conquered him without lifting a hand. The humiliation of this knowledge ate at him more deeply than any wound. He was the warrior, the feared one, yet it was she who carried the real strength. The tribe began to notice his unease. He no longer smiled when songs were sung around the fire. He no longer boasted of victories, for every victory felt hollow. When he tried to take other women, he found himself recoiling, her whisper between them like a wall. Her silent power had stripped him of the desires that once ruled him. Her strength lay in survival. Despite what he had done, she lived on, perhaps rebuilding her life, perhaps caring for her family, perhaps finding moments of peace. Meanwhile, he was the one left broken. Her ability to endure turned into his chain, a constant reminder that she had risen while he had fallen. The warrior began to realize that power is not always loud, not always bathed in blood and fire. Sometimes the greatest power is carried in silence, in the dignity of a whisper that cannot be erased. She had given him no curses, no shouts, no threats. She had given him only her plea. Yet it was enough to enslave his soul forever, and so her silent power lived on in him, a shadow he could never escape. Though she might never know it, she had defeated the warrior, not with steel, but with her strength to remain human in the face of his cruelty. Back in his village, the warrior's people celebrated him as they always had. They saw only his victories, the spoils he brought, the blood he spilled for the tribe. To them he was a hero, a man who embodied strength and courage. But inside he carried a shame so heavy it bent his spirit. The mark of shame was invisible, yet it followed him everywhere. He would walk among his people, but he felt like a ghost. When he lifted his spear, his hand trembled. When he danced at ceremonies, his steps faltered. His tribe praised him, but their voices felt distant like echoes through fog. The more they honored him, the more hollow he felt. The warrior had never known shame before. In his culture, conquest was survival. Women were spoils of war, and men rarely questioned it. Yet this time was different. The woman's whisper had pierced through the old ways, leaving him unable to hide behind custom. He had heard her plea and he had ignored it. That truth carved itself into his soul like a scar that would not heal. Shame became his shadow. In the quiet moments it grew larger, wrapping around him. When he looked into the eyes of his brothers, he wondered if they could see it too. Did they know what he had done? Did they sense that the man standing before them was not whole anymore? Some began to notice his change. He laughed less. He withdrew from the fire at night, sitting on the edges of gatherings. Mothers pulled their children away when he approached, not from knowledge but from instinct. They sensed something broken in him. Even his horse grew restless beneath his hands, as if rejecting the weight of his spirit. The elders spoke of honor as the root of freedom, and he knew he had lost his. No matter how many battles he won, no matter how many enemies fell before his spear, he could not wash away the mark of shame. Victories felt meaningless, for shame clung tighter than glory ever could. The people believed he had angered the spirits, and in truth, he had. But it was not just the spirits who judged him. It was himself. Each night, he returned to that barn in his mind. Each night he saw her trembling, heard her whisper, and felt the weakness of his choice. The mark of shame was not something he could share. To speak of it would destroy his honor among his people. And so, he carried it in silence. That silence grew heavier with time until it felt like a stone pressing down on his chest. He tried to fight it the only way he knew, through more war, more conquest, more attempts to bury the whisper in noise and blood. But the louder the world became, the louder her whisper grew. Shame fed on his victories, growing larger with every raid, every life he took. The mark of shame became his true enemy, one he could not kill with a blade. It stripped him of joy, of peace, of pride. He realized too late that a man can lose battles and still live free, but a man who loses his honor lives in chains. The warrior had thought himself strong, yet shame proved stronger. And though his people still saw a hero, he knew the truth. The mark of shame had already claimed him. The warrior's torment grew unbearable. Days turned to weeks and weeks into seasons, yet the whisper never left him. It clung to his spirit like smoke to fire, unyielding, inescapable. He realized then that there was only one path left to him: redemption. Not through conquest, not through battle, but through facing the woman whose plea had chained his soul. Leaving his people, he set out alone across the plains. His horse carried him through endless grasslands, under skies heavy, with storm and silence. Every step was heavy, as though the earth itself judged his passage. He was a warrior by trade, yet now he rode not as a conqueror, but as a man seeking something greater than victory. On his journey, he passed villages and rivers, but nothing brought him peace. He found himself speaking aloud, as if the spirits might answer, "What must I do to be free?" Yet no answer came. Only the wind carried the whisper back to him. At night, he sat by small fires, staring into the flames. He thought of her, not as a victim, but as a person. Did she rebuild her home? Did she walk freely under the sun? Or did she carry scars too heavy to heal? The thought that she might still suffer because of him deepened his torment. Redemption was not just about freeing his spirit, it was about restoring what he had broken. The path to her settlement was long, and when he finally arrived, he saw it rebuilt, though marked by the scars of the raid. Children played in the dirt, women carried baskets, men tended to repairs. Life had returned, but it was not untouched. He felt the weight of being the shadow over their recovery. When he saw her, his breath caught. She was older than in his memory, her hair tied back, her face marked with resilience rather than fear. She carried herself with dignity, as though she had endured fire and risen from it. She was no longer the trembling girl in the barn, she was something more, stronger, unbroken. He dismounted, approached, and fell to his knees. The villagers turned to look, confused, wary of this warrior kneeling before one of their own. His voice broke as he spoke. "I wronged you. Your whisper has followed me, binding my soul. I beg you, if forgiveness exists, grant me a piece of it. If not, let me suffer before you, so that I may carry the weight in truth, not in shadow." The woman looked at him for a long time. She did not strike him, nor call for others to do so. Her silence was powerful, steady, and he felt it pierce him deeper than any blade. She did not need to forgive him to show her strength. Her very survival was an answer. For him, redemption was not immediate. Her forgiveness, and if it ever came, could not erase the act. But the act of kneeling, of confessing, of placing his pride beneath her dignity, was the first step toward balance. For the first time since that night, he felt a crack in the chains around his spirit. The journey of redemption, he realized, was not about reaching an end, but walking the path forever. Whether or not she forgave him, whether or not the spirits released him, he would live each day in the shadow of his choice, striving to honor what he once destroyed. And so the warrior's greatest journey was not one of conquest, but of humility. A journey not measured in miles, but in the weight of a whisper. When the warrior found her again, he expected to see the same trembling girl from the barn, fragile, broken, forever trapped in that night of terror. But when his eyes fell upon her, he saw something far different. The woman had not only survived, she had grown stronger. Her posture was straight, her gaze unwavering. She worked with her people, rebuilding their lives, her hands roughened by labor but steady with purpose. She was not defined by what he had done to her. She was defined by the strength she had forged afterward. This strength shook him more deeply than her whisper had. He had imagined her living as a shadow of herself, haunted, destroyed. But instead she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made him feel smaller than ever before. She did not wear her pain as a visible wound. She had transformed it into resilience. When he approached her, she did not flee, nor did she rage at him. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something terrifying. She no longer feared him. That absence of fear, born of survival and strength, was the sharpest judgment he could ever face. He fell to his knees, speaking of torment, of the chains of her whisper. He begged for her forgiveness, but she did not give it freely. Instead, she stood in silence, her eyes holding him like a mirror. That silence was not weakness, it was power. It forced him to sit with the weight of his actions, to realize that forgiveness could not be demanded, nor easily given. Her strength lay not in vengeance, but in endurance. She had lived while he remained trapped. She had found a way to rebuild, while he had unraveled. The balance of power had shifted. She was the free one, while he was enslaved by shame. In that moment, he understood the truth. The strongest people are not those who conquer, but those who survive and rise again. She had no need to forgive him to prove her strength. Her very existence, her ability to stand tall after what he had done, was her triumph. For the warrior, this realization was crushing yet liberating. He no longer saw her as a victim, but as someone greater than himself. She had overcome what he could not. He carried chains, but she carried freedom. He lived haunted, but she lived whole. Her strength became his teacher. From that moment, he swore never to raise his hand against another woman, never to dishonor another plea. Her whisper had chained him, but her strength had changed him. In her, he saw the reflection of all he had lost: dignity, freedom, honor. And so, while he may never be free, he carried with him the lesson of her strength. For the woman who once whispered in fear had become the silent force that shaped the rest of his life. For years the warrior carried the whisper like a stone in his chest, unspoken and unresolved. His people believed him to be strong, untouchable, a man carved from the iron of battle. But inside, he was hollow. He knew that the path toward peace, if such a path existed, required one thing: confession. When he finally stood before the woman again, the moment weighed on him heavier than any battle. His body shook not from fear of her people, but from the truth he was about to reveal. Around them, silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of wind through the grass. He fell to his knees, his forehead pressed to the dirt. "My soul," he began, his voice low and unsteady, "is no longer mine. That night, I took more than what was not given. I ignored your plea. And since then, I have lived in chains that no blade can cut." His words spilled out like blood from a wound, raw and desperate. "I see you in my dreams. I hear your whisper in every silence. I cannot fight it. I cannot escape it. I cannot breathe without it pressing on me. I beg you, do not forgive me if you cannot, but hear my confession. Let the weight fall where it belongs." The villagers who gathered murmured among themselves, astonished to hear such vulnerability from a man they once feared. But his eyes never left hers. He searched for judgment, for hatred, for something that could cut him deeper than he had already cut himself. The woman remained still, her expression unreadable. She let him speak, pouring out years of torment, each word carrying the weight of his shame. He confessed not only to her, but to the spirits, to himself, to the world. He spoke of victories that meant nothing, of honor that had rotted away, of nights without rest. At last silence fell again. He had emptied himself, his pride shattered, his voice hoarse. For the first time he felt light, not freed, but exposed. The burden of silence was gone, replaced by the burden of truth. The woman did not rush to respond. Instead, She studied him. He realized then that his confession was not about her words, but about his own release. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be hers to give, not something he could demand. But to confess was to place the wound in the open air, to let it breathe. His confession did not erase what he had done. It did not unbind the chains entirely. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. By confessing, he admitted that he was not the unshakable warrior the world saw, but a broken man chained to his own dishonor. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "You carry your chains because you deserve them. Forgiveness is not mine alone to give. The spirits heard my plea that night. It is they who bind you. You must walk with this truth until your last breath." Her words did not free him, but they gave clarity. His confession had not been for release, but for acceptance. And in that acceptance he felt the faintest shift, a step toward balance, even if freedom would never come. For the first time he understood that strength was not in silence, but in confession. The warrior, once feared by all, had found courage not in battle, but in speaking the truth of his broken soul. The warrior thought that confession might ease his torment. For a brief moment after kneeling before the woman, he felt lighter, as though he had laid down part of his burden. But he soon discovered that some chains cannot be broken by words. The haunting never ended. Everywhere he went, the whisper followed him. In the quiet of the forest, he heard it in the rustle of leaves. By the river, he heard it in the ripple of water. At night, it pressed against his ears, louder than the crackle of fire. Her plea was not bound to the barn of that night. It had fused itself into the marrow of his being. He tried to find solace in war again, throwing himself into battles with reckless fury. But even in the chaos of combat, the haunting crept in. As his spear struck an enemy, he heard her voice. As he rode into raids, he saw her eyes in the flames. Victory turned to ashes in his mouth, for every triumph was poisoned by the memory of dishonor. He began to understand that the haunting was not punishment from the woman, but from himself. He had ignored her plea, and in doing so, had split his soul in two, the warrior and the man. The warrior won battles, but the man was forever lost in shame. No prayer, no victory, no confession could mend that divide. The people of his tribe noticed his decline. Once a proud figure, he now walked like a shadow. His hair grew unkempt, his eyes hollow, his shoulders bent beneath invisible weight. Children whispered that he was cursed. Elders nodded silently, knowing the look of a man marked by spirits. The warrior withdrew more and more. He stopped sitting at the fire. He stopped laughing. He stopped seeking the company of others. He wandered into the plains for days at a time, returning with hollow eyes and trembling hands. In his solitude, he realized the haunting was eternal. It was not a punishment that would fade with time, nor a curse that could be broken by ritual. It was part of him now. He could no more escape it than he could escape his own shadow. The haunting was not just of her voice, but of what it meant. It reminded him every day of who he had become, a man who had ignored mercy, a man who had chosen pride over dignity, a man who had chained himself. He began to fear not death, but what came after. If her whisper followed him in life, what would it do in death? Would he wander the afterworld still hearing her plea? Would the spirits deny him rest, forcing him to walk forever in torment? The haunting never ended, and perhaps that was justice. For some acts are not meant to be forgotten. Some wounds are not meant to heal. His torment was not just punishment, but truth. Once a man dishonors a whisper for mercy, his soul is never free again. And so, he lived as a ghost long before death claimed him. A warrior on the outside, but inside, a prisoner of a single whisper. A reminder that sometimes the softest voice can bind more tightly than chains of iron. Time passed, and the warrior grew older. His strength faded, his hair grayed, and his body carried the scars of countless battles. Yet the deepest scar was not visible. It lived inside him, the whisper that had never left his soul. He no longer rode into raids with the same fire. He no longer sang war songs with the same pride. Instead, he walked with a heaviness that others began to notice. The young men of the tribe, once eager to follow him, now watched him with curiosity. They saw a warrior who had everything: honor, victories, songs sung in his name, yet lived as though burdened by invisible chains. Around the fire, he rarely spoke. When asked about his silence, he gave only vague answers, but his eyes carried truths that words could not. Slowly, stories began to spread among the younger warriors. They whispered that he was cursed, that he had angered the spirits. Some said he had taken something that was not his to take, and the Great Spirit had bound his soul for it. The details were vague, but the lesson became clear. Dishonor brings chains no blade can cut. Though he never told them the full truth, his presence became a warning. The way his shoulders bent, the sorrow in his eyes, the silence that followed him, all spoke louder than words. Younger men who once sought glory began to question what kind of glory they pursued. Could a single act, a single night, strip a man of peace forever? The old warrior's life said yes. And so the legacy of the whisper spread. It was not written in songs of victory or painted on hides. It lived in hushed conversations, in the cautionary words of elders, in the lessons passed to boys becoming men. They were told, a warrior's strength is not measured by what he takes, but by what he refuses to take. A plea ignored will follow you longer than any victory won. In this way, the woman's whisper lived on beyond her, beyond him. Though she had spoken it only once in fear and desperation, it became a story carried by generations. The warrior, who once thought himself feared, became remembered not for his battles, but for the shame that broke him. His victories faded into dust, but the whisper endured. It was a strange kind of justice. His dishonor, meant to dominate her, instead gave her power across time. Through him, her voice was immortalized. He had thought he silenced her when he raised her skirt, but instead he made her plea echo through the lives of those who came after. In the end, the legacy of the whisper was this: power does not always come from swords or victories or songs. Sometimes it comes from a single moment of truth, spoken softly, but carrying forever. And for the warrior, that legacy was his punishment. He could never escape being the man whose soul was broken by a whisper. When death finally came for the warrior, it was not on the battlefield. His body was too frail for war, his spear too heavy for his hands. He died quietly, lying beneath the same wide sky where he had once ridden with fire in his heart. But even as his breath slowed, the whisper was still with him. He closed his eyes and heard it again. Don't raise my skirt, please. The same words that had haunted him through youth, through manhood, through age. They were not distant or faded. They were as sharp as the night he first heard them. In that moment, he realized the truth he had long feared. The bond was eternal. Her voice was not just part of his memory, it was part of his soul. He passed into death with the whisper as his final companion. The people of his tribe buried him as a warrior, singing of his battles, laying weapons at his side. But they did not know that beneath the earth lay a man who had never truly been free. In the afterworld, the haunting did not cease. The spirits welcomed the brave, the honorable, the just. But for him, there was no welcome. He wandered the plains of eternity alone, still hearing her voice. The eternal bond was not one of love or of choice, but of shame and truth. Her whisper was the chain that bound him to his dishonor forever. Yet in this eternal bond, there was also a kind of justice. He had taken her choice that night, but in return his spirit lost its own. She lived her life, endured, and perhaps even found peace. He, meanwhile, could never escape. Her strength freed her, his weakness imprisoned him. The eternal bond was more than punishment. It was a reminder that actions carve deeper than flesh. That a moment of cruelty can shape not just a life, but a soul's eternity. He had raised her skirt against her plea, and in that act he tied his spirit to her forever. Generations later, his name faded. His tribe spoke less of him, for his victories no longer mattered. But the whisper remained. The eternal bond ensured that he would never be remembered for strength, but for weakness. His soul's prison became his story's truth, that no man is free who ignores mercy. And so even in eternity, he carried her whisper. Not as a voice of forgiveness, not as a voice of vengeance, but as an eternal reminder. A bond between them that death could not break. In life, he was a warrior. In death, he was a prisoner. And in eternity, he was forever bound to the whisper that stripped his soul of freedom.